I still remember the exact moment I realized Mrs. Whitmore hated me. It wasn't a dramatic confrontation or a screaming match in the hallway. It was something much smaller, something most people would have missed entirely. It was the way she looked at me during class one afternoon in late September, when I raised my hand to answer a question about Virginia Woolf. I had been her star student for nearly 2 years by then. I had won the regional creative writing competition with her guidance. I had stayed after school countless times just to discuss books and writing and life. I had trusted her more than almost anyone else in my life. But in that moment, when our eyes met, I saw something cold flash across her face. Something that looked almost like disgust. And even though she called on me and I answered correctly and she nodded and moved on, I felt something shift between us. I felt the ground beneath my feet become just slightly less stable. I told myself I was imagining things. I told myself I was being paranoid. I told myself that Mrs. Claire Whitmore, the most beloved English teacher at Westbrook Academy, the woman who had mentored me and encouraged me and made me believe I could be a real writer someday, could not possibly be looking at me like I was her enemy. But I was wrong. I was so terribly, devastatingly wrong. And by the time I understood what was really happening, she had already begun dismantling everything I had ever built. My name is Sophie Hartley, and I was 17 years old when the person I admired most in the world decided to destroy me. This is the story of how she turned my entire school against me, how she nearly succeeded in erasing everything I was, and how I eventually found a way to expose her for what she really was. This is my confession, my testimony, and my warning. Because sometimes the people who claim to care about you the most are the ones most capable of cruelty, and sometimes the only way to survive is to become someone you never thought you could be. I should probably start at the beginning. I should tell you what my life was like before everything fell apart, because I think that context matters. I think you need to understand what I lost in order to understand why I fought so hard to get it back. I grew up in a small town about 40 miles outside of Boston. My parents divorced when I was 11, and my mother and I moved to Westbrook shortly after that. It was supposed to be a fresh start. My mother had gotten a job at a law firm in the city, and Westbrook Academy had an excellent reputation. It was one of those old private schools with ivy-covered brick buildings and manicured lawns and traditions that stretched back over a century. It was the kind of place where generations of families sent their children, where legacy admissions were common and social hierarchies were firmly established. I was an outsider from the moment I walked through the gates. My mother and I were not wealthy. We lived in a modest apartment on the edge of town, while most of my classmates lived in sprawling homes with pools and tennis courts. I did not have the right clothes or the right accent or the right last name. I was the scholarship kid, the new girl, the one who did not belong. But I had one thing that set me apart. One thing that nobody could take away from me. I could write. I had always been able to write, ever since I was old enough to hold a pencil. Words came to me easily, naturally, like breathing. I could spin stories out of thin air. I could describe emotions that most people struggled to articulate. My teachers at my old school had told me I was gifted, and even though I never quite believed them, I knew that writing was the one thing I was good at. It was the one thing that made me feel like I mattered. When I arrived at Westbrook Academy as a freshman, I was terrified. I spent the first few weeks keeping my head down, trying to navigate the complex social landscape without drawing too much attention to myself. I ate lunch alone in the library. I avoided eye contact in the hallways. I told myself that I just needed to survive until graduation, and then I could escape to college and start over somewhere new. And then I met Mrs. Whitmore. She taught advanced English literature, and I had her for fourth period every day. From the very first class, I was captivated. She was not like any teacher I had ever had before. She was passionate and animated and deeply intelligent. She talked about books like they were living things, like the characters were real people who deserved our empathy and understanding. She encouraged debate and discussion. She challenged us to think critically, to question assumptions, to dig beneath the surface of every text we read. She made me feel like literature mattered, like stories had the power to change the world. I was shy at first. I rarely spoke up in class, preferring to express my thoughts through my written assignments. But Mrs. Whitmore noticed me anyway. She noticed the essays I submitted, the way I analyzed texts with care and nuance. She started writing longer comments on my papers, praising my insights and encouraging me to push myself further. She asked me to stay after class one day, and I was terrified that I had done something wrong. But when everyone else had filed out of the room, she just smiled at me and said, "Sophie, you have a remarkable talent. I hope you know that. I hope someone has told you that before." Nobody had, not like that anyway, not with such conviction and sincerity. I felt tears prick at the corners of my eyes, and I had to look away so she would not see how much her words meant to me. That was the beginning of our relationship. Over the following months, Mrs. Whitmore became my mentor, my advocate, my champion. She encouraged me to join the school literary magazine. She pushed me to enter writing competitions. She spent countless hours helping me refine my work, teaching me about structure and pacing and the subtle art of subtext. She lent me books from her personal collection. She told me about her own journey as a writer, about the novels she had once tried to publish, about the rejection letters that still stung even after all these years. She was vulnerable with me in a way that felt rare and precious. She treated me not as a student, but as a fellow artist, as someone worthy of respect and honesty. By the time I was a junior, I was the editor of the literary magazine. I had won several local and regional writing awards. My college application essays were already polished and ready. Mrs. Whitmore had written me the most glowing recommendation letter I could have imagined. She told me that I had the potential to be published someday, that she could see my name on the spine of a book. She told me that she was proud of me, that I was like the daughter she never had. And I believed her. I trusted her completely. I opened my heart to her in a way I had never opened it to anyone, not even my own mother. I was a fool. The first sign that something was wrong came in September of my senior year. I was working on a short story for a national competition, one of the most prestigious for high school writers in the country. The deadline was in October, and I had been pouring everything I had into the piece. It was about a girl whose mother was slowly losing her memory to early onset dementia, and it was deeply personal. It drew on my own fears and experiences, on the way I sometimes felt like I was watching my relationship with my own mother slip away as I got older and she got busier with work. Mrs. Whitmore had been helping me with it all summer. She had read multiple drafts. She had given me extensive feedback. She had been excited and encouraging and supportive. But when school started again, something changed. She seemed distant during our after-school sessions. She was less enthusiastic about my work. Her feedback became vague and unhelpful. "It's fine," she would say, barely glancing at the pages I had spent weeks revising. "Just keep working on it." I tried to tell myself that she was just busy. The school year was always hectic in the beginning, and she had 3 new sections of freshmen to wrangle. She was probably tired. She probably just needed time to settle into the new routine. But there were other things too. Small things that I could not quite explain, the way she seemed to avoid my eyes in class, the way she called on other students more often than she called on me, the way she praised Maya Chen's essay on Hamlet with effusive enthusiasm while offering only a curt nod when I turned in my own. Maya Chen was new to our advanced literature class that year. She had transferred to Westbrook from a school in California, and she came from an incredibly wealthy family. Her father was some kind of tech executive, and her mother was on the board of several major arts organizations. Maya was beautiful and confident and charismatic, the kind of girl who could walk into any room and immediately become the center of attention. She had sleek black hair and perfect skin and clothes that probably cost more than my mother's monthly salary. She was everything I was not. I tried not to be jealous. I tried to remind myself that Mrs. Whitmore could care about multiple students, that her attention was not a finite resource, but it was hard. It was hard to watch Maya soak up all the praise and encouragement that used to be directed at me. It was hard to see them laughing together after class, sharing inside jokes that I was not a part of. It was hard to feel like I was being slowly, quietly replaced. The incident with my story was what finally confirmed that something was genuinely wrong. I had submitted my short story to the national competition 2 weeks before the deadline, feeling nervous but hopeful. Mrs. Whitmore had assured me that it was ready, that it was some of my best work. But 3 days after the deadline passed, I received an email from the competition organizers. They were writing to inform me that my submission had been disqualified due to evidence of plagiarism. They had found substantial similarities between my story and another submitted entry, and upon investigation, they had determined that the other entry had been written first. My story was therefore considered derivative, and I was being removed from consideration. I read the email 5 times before the words started to make sense. Plagiarism! They were accusing me of plagiarism, but that was impossible. I had written every single word of that story myself. I had lived with those characters for months. I had bled onto those pages. There was no way, absolutely no way, that my work was derivative of anyone else's. I printed the email and went straight to Mrs. Whitmore's classroom. It was after hours, and the building was mostly empty. I found her sitting at her desk, grading papers, and I thrust the email toward her with shaking hands. "I don't understand," I said, my voice cracking. "They're saying I plagiarized, but I didn't. I wrote that story. You know I wrote it. You helped me write it." Mrs. Whitmore looked at the email for a long moment. Her expression was unreadable. Then she looked up at me, and I saw something flicker in her eyes, something that looked almost like satisfaction. "That is very concerning, Sophie," she said slowly. "Very concerning indeed." She did not sound concerned. She sounded calm, almost amused. "I suppose the best thing to do would be to compare your story to the other submission and see if we can determine what happened." "I don't have the other submission," I said desperately. "The email doesn't say who wrote it or what it's about, just that there are similarities." Mrs. Whitmore set the email down on her desk. "That does make things difficult. Perhaps you should reach out to the organizers and request more information." "I already did. They said they can't share the other entry due to privacy concerns." "Well," Mrs. Whitmore folded her hands, "that is unfortunate. But Sophie, I have to ask, is there any possibility that you may have inadvertently borrowed ideas from something you read? Perhaps something you came across online?" I stared at her, uncomprehending. "What? No, absolutely not. That story came from my own life, my own experiences. You know that. You read every draft." "I read your drafts, yes, but I obviously did not read whatever the other entry was. I have no way of knowing whether there are genuine similarities or not." Her voice was calm, reasonable, infuriatingly neutral. "I'm not accusing you of anything, Sophie. I'm simply saying that we need to approach this carefully. Something was wrong. Something was deeply, fundamentally wrong. This was not how Mrs. Whitmore was supposed to react. She was supposed to be outraged on my behalf. She was supposed to be fighting for me, advocating for me, helping me clear my name. Instead, she was sitting there acting like I might actually be guilty, like I might actually have stolen someone else's work. "I didn't do this," I said, and now I was crying, tears streaming down my face. "I would never. You have to believe me." Mrs. Whitmore looked at me with something that might have been pity or might have been contempt. "I think it would be best if you went home, Sophie. Get some rest. We can discuss this more tomorrow." I left her classroom feeling like I was in a nightmare. I walked through the empty hallways in a daze, trying to understand what was happening. By the time I got home, I had convinced myself that I was overreacting. Mrs. Whitmore was probably just being cautious. She was probably trying to remain objective until all the facts were in. She was probably going to help me fight this once she had time to think about it. She had to be. She was my mentor. She cared about me. She would never abandon me when I needed her most. But she did. She absolutely did. The next morning, I arrived at school to find that everything had changed. The whispers started as soon as I walked through the front doors. Groups of students huddled together, glancing at me and then quickly looking away. People I had known for years avoided my eyes. Even the girl who sat next to me in calculus shifted her desk slightly away from mine, like I was contagious. By lunchtime, I understood what had happened. The plagiarism accusation had spread through the school like wildfire. Everyone knew. Everyone was talking about it. And the story that was circulating was not the story I knew to be true. According to the rumors, I had stolen a story from Maya Chen. Maya, the brilliant new transfer student. Maya, the daughter of tech royalty. Maya, who had apparently submitted her own short story to the same national competition. Maya, whose entry had been deemed the original. The news was everywhere. It was on social media. It was being discussed in group chats. Someone had even created a meme comparing me to a famous literary plagiarist, with my face photoshopped onto a picture of a thief creeping through the night. I was being torn apart, and I had no idea how to stop it. I found Maya in the hallway between classes. She was surrounded by a group of admirers, laughing at something one of them had said. When she saw me approaching, her smile did not falter. If anything, it seemed to widen. "Maya," I said, my voice barely above a whisper, "can we talk?" She tilted her head, studying me with cool amusement. "About what?" "About the story. About the competition. I don't understand what's happening. I didn't plagiarize anything. I wrote my story months ago. I have all the drafts on my computer. I can prove it." Maya's smile sharpened into something almost predatory. "Sophie, I don't know what to tell you. The competition organizers clearly disagree. They reviewed both submissions and determined that mine was the original. It's not my fault that you decided to copy my work." "I didn't." My voice was too loud now, drawing stares from passing students. "I have never even read your story. How could I have copied something I've never seen?" Maya shrugged elegantly. "I don't know how plagiarists work. Maybe you saw something I posted online. Maybe you overheard me talking about it in class. Maybe Mrs. Whitmore mentioned my story to you, and you decided to steal my ideas." She paused, letting that sink in. "Oh, wait. Mrs. Whitmore did know about my story, didn't she? She was helping me with it all summer, just like she was helping you." The ground seemed to tilt beneath my feet. "What?" I said. "Mrs. Whitmore was helping me with my story. She read all my drafts. She gave me feedback. She told me it was some of the best work she'd ever seen from a student." Maya's smile was knife-sharp now. Funny how she was giving both of us the same encouragement, isn't it? Almost like she was playing favorites and didn't want to choose. I could not breathe. I could not think. I just stood there, frozen, while Maya turned and walked away, her entourage following close behind. She did not look back. I spent the rest of that day in a fog. I went through the motions of attending classes, but I could not focus on anything. My mind was racing, trying to piece together what Maya had said. Mrs. Whitmore had been helping Maya with her story all summer, but she had been helping me too. She had read all my drafts, she had given me feedback, she had encouraged me, supported me, told me my work was brilliant. Had she been saying the same things to Maya? Had she been playing us against each other this whole time? And then a darker thought crept in, one I did not want to acknowledge but could not push away. Mrs. Whitmore had access to both our stories. She knew the plots, the characters, the themes. She knew everything. If she wanted to, she could have made them similar. She could have given me feedback that pushed my story in a certain direction. She could have suggested ideas, borrowed language, created overlaps that would later look like plagiarism. But why? Why would she do that? I thought about the past few weeks. I thought about the coldness in her eyes, the distance in her voice, the way she had seemed almost pleased when I showed her the disqualification email. I thought about Maya with her wealth and her connections and her effortless confidence. I thought about the way Mrs. Whitmore had been gravitating toward her, away from me, and I started to understand. Mrs. Whitmore had found a new favorite, and she was getting rid of the old one. The next few weeks were the worst of my life. The rumors continued to spread, growing more elaborate and more damaging with each passing day. People I had considered friends refused to speak to me. I was removed from my position as editor of the literary magazine. The faculty advisor, a nervous young English teacher who had always seemed intimidated by Mrs. Whitmore, told me that it was best if I stepped down voluntarily to avoid further embarrassment to the publication. When I refused, I was informed that my removal had been approved by the department head. Mrs. Whitmore was copied on that email. My mother tried to help. She wanted to go to the school administration, to demand an investigation, to threaten legal action. But I begged her not to. I was terrified of making things worse. I was terrified of becoming even more of a target. I still believed somehow that if I kept my head down and waited for the truth to come out, everything would eventually be okay. I still believed that someone would realize I was innocent, but instead of getting better, things got worse. About 3 weeks after the initial accusation, I was called into the principal's office. Mrs. Whitmore was there, along with the dean of students and a woman I did not recognize. The woman turned out to be Maya Chen's mother, Patricia Chen, who was on the school's board of trustees. She was wearing a perfectly tailored suit and an expression of cold fury, and I knew immediately that I was in serious trouble. The meeting was brutal. Mrs. Chen accused me of targeting her daughter, of deliberately trying to sabotage Maya's academic career through plagiarism and defamation. She produced printouts of social media posts where I had allegedly attacked Maya online, posts I had never written from accounts I had never created. She demanded that I be suspended, possibly expelled. She threatened to involve lawyers if the school did not take immediate action. I tried to defend myself. I tried to explain that I had not written those posts, that I had not plagiarized anyone, that this was all a terrible mistake, but no one seemed to be listening. Mrs. Whitmore sat in the corner of the room with an expression of deep concern and said, "I want to believe Sophie, I really do. She has been my student for years, and I have always thought highly of her. But the evidence is troubling. The similarities between the stories are undeniable, and these social media attacks, well, they suggest a pattern of harassment that I simply cannot ignore." I looked at her, this woman I had trusted and admired and loved like a second mother, and I saw the lie in her eyes. She knew I was innocent, and she was choosing to destroy me anyway. The school ultimately decided not to expel me, largely because my mother threatened to sue if they took action without a proper investigation. But I was suspended for 2 weeks while they reviewed the evidence. I was banned from extracurricular activities for the remainder of the year. I was placed on academic probation. And perhaps most devastatingly, a note was added to my permanent record indicating that I had been accused of plagiarism and harassment pending investigation. My college applications were due in just a few months. The dream schools I had been working toward for years, Yale, Columbia, Brown, suddenly seemed impossibly far away. No university was going to accept a student with plagiarism accusations on their record. No admissions committee was going to look past harassment allegations. Everything I had worked for, everything I had dreamed of, was slipping through my fingers. I spent my 2-week suspension in my bedroom, staring at the ceiling and trying to understand what had happened to my life. My mother brought me food that I barely touched. She tried to talk to me, to comfort me, to assure me that everything would be okay. But I could see the fear in her eyes. She was a lawyer. She understood how serious these accusations were. She knew that even if we eventually proved my innocence, the damage might already be done. It was during that suspension that I had my first conversation with Ethan Cole. He was a senior like me, but we had never really interacted before. He was one of those kids who existed on the margins of school society, too quiet to be popular, but too intelligent to be completely overlooked. He was in the orchestra, I knew, and he spent most of his free time in the computer lab working on projects that no one else seemed to understand. He was not the kind of person who would normally reach out to me, and I was not the kind of person who would normally notice him. But he messaged me one night on social media, and his message was unlike anything else I had received. While most people were either attacking me or pretending I did not exist, Ethan simply said, "I don't think you did it. I've been watching and something doesn't add up. If you want to talk, I'm here." I almost ignored the message. I was exhausted and broken and did not have the energy to explain myself to yet another person who would probably end up believing the rumors anyway. But something about Ethan's words stuck with me. Something about the way he said, "I've been watching," made me think that maybe, just maybe, he knew something I did not. I wrote back, "What do you mean, you've been watching?" His response came quickly. "I mean, I pay attention. I notice things other people miss. And I've noticed some things about Mrs. Whitmore that I think you need to know." We met the next day at a coffee shop in town, far enough from campus that we were unlikely to run into anyone from school. Ethan was taller than I expected, with messy brown hair and glasses that he kept pushing up on his nose. He spoke quietly, like he was used to not being heard, but his eyes were sharp and observant. I could tell immediately that he was the kind of person who saw the world differently than most people, the kind of person who noticed patterns and connections that everyone else overlooked. "I've been at Westbrook since freshman year," Ethan said, stirring his coffee. "I'm not popular, I don't have a lot of friends, but that means I have a lot of time to watch, and I've been watching Mrs. Whitmore for a long time." "Why?" I asked. Ethan looked uncomfortable. "Because she's not who she pretends to be. She's not this caring, supportive mentor that everyone thinks she is. She's something else entirely, and I've seen her do this before." My heart started beating faster. "Do what before?" "This," Ethan said, gesturing vaguely. "Find a student to mentor, build them up, make them dependent on her, and then, when something goes wrong or she finds someone new, tear them down." He paused, meeting my eyes. "You're not the first person she's destroyed, Sophie, and if she's not stopped, you won't be the last." Ethan told me about a girl named Rebecca Torres, who had been a senior when he was a freshman. Rebecca had been Mrs. Whitmore's favorite student back then, the editor of the literary magazine, a talented writer with dreams of becoming a journalist. She had been everything I later became. And then, in the spring of her senior year, she had been accused of cheating on her final exam. She had denied it vehemently, but the evidence against her was overwhelming. Another student had come forward claiming that Rebecca had stolen his notes. Mrs. Whitmore had expressed deep disappointment in her former protégé. Rebecca had been expelled just weeks before graduation. She had lost her scholarship to Northwestern. Last Ethan had heard she was working at a grocery store somewhere in Ohio, all her dreams of journalism forgotten. I listened to this story with growing horror. "And you think Mrs. Whitmore was behind it?" "I know she was," Ethan said. "The student who accused Rebecca of stealing his notes was Nathan Cross. He was Mrs. Whitmore's new favorite that year. She had started mentoring him right around the time she started pulling away from Rebecca." Sound familiar? It did. It sounded terrifyingly familiar. "But why?" I asked. "Why would she do this? What does she get out of destroying her students?" Ethan shook his head. "I don't know for sure, but I have a theory. Mrs. Whitmore wanted to be a writer once, right? She told you about her novel, her rejection letters." I nodded. "I think she resents her students. I think she takes pleasure in mentoring them, in being important to them, in having power over them. But when they start to succeed too much, when they start to have the kind of opportunities she never got, something changes. She can't stand to see them do what she never could. So she tears them down. She makes sure they fail. And she does it in a way that makes her look innocent, even sympathetic. She's the concerned teacher who tried so hard but couldn't save her wayward student. Everyone feels sorry for her. No one suspects what she really is." I sat with this for a long moment, trying to process it. It sounded insane. It sounded like a conspiracy theory, but it also sounded true. It explained everything that had happened to me. The coldness in Mrs. Whitmore's eyes, the way she had helped Maya with her story at the same time she was helping me with mine, the plagiarism accusation that had come out of nowhere, the fake social media posts, the way Mrs. Whitmore had sat in that meeting and lied, had looked right at me and lied, while pretending to be disappointed and concerned. "How do I prove it?" I asked Ethan. "How do I prove she did this to me?" "That's where I come in," Ethan said, and for the first time he smiled. "I told you I spend a lot of time in the computer lab. I'm good with technology, really good, and I've been gathering evidence for a while now. Not specifically about you, but about Mrs. Whitmore in general, her patterns, her methods, the students she's targeted over the years." He paused. "I think if we work together, we can expose her, but it's going to take time, and it's going to be dangerous. She's smart, Sophie. She's been doing this for years without getting caught. We need to be smarter." I thought about my options. I could continue trying to defend myself within the system, appealing to administrators who had already shown that they were more interested in protecting the school's reputation than in finding the truth. I could wait for the investigation to conclude, hoping that someone would eventually believe me. Or I could fight back. I could work with Ethan to uncover what Mrs. Whitmore had really done. I could find the proof that would exonerate me and expose her. It was not really a choice at all. "I'm in," I said. "Tell me what I need to do." The first thing I had to do was return to school and pretend that nothing had changed. My suspension ended on a Monday in late October, and I walked back through those front gates feeling like a different person. The old Sophie, the naive Sophie, the Sophie who had trusted her teacher and believed in the fundamental fairness of the world, was gone. In her place was someone harder, someone more careful, someone who understood that some people would smile to your face while plotting your destruction. I kept my head down. I did not engage with the rumors or try to defend myself in public. I attended classes, completed assignments, and avoided any situation that might give Mrs. Whitmore or Maya another opportunity to attack me. To most people, I probably looked defeated, broken, but inside I was anything but. Ethan and I communicated through a secure messaging app that he had set up on our phones. We met in person only rarely, always in public places where we were unlikely to be observed by anyone from school. He was paranoid about security, and at first I found it excessive. But the more I learned about what we were up against, the more I understood why. Mrs. Whitmore, Ethan explained, was not just a bitter failed writer with a grudge against her students. She was a calculating predator who had been operating for years without consequence. He had managed to track down several of her former students, not just Rebecca Torres, but others going back almost a decade. The pattern was always the same. A promising student would catch Mrs. Whitmore's attention. She would mentor them, encourage them, become central to their life. And then, inevitably, something would happen. An accusation, a scandal, a sudden fall from grace. The student would be destroyed, and Mrs. Whitmore would emerge unscathed, perhaps even more beloved than before, for her apparent willingness to hold her students accountable. The alumni Ethan had contacted were scattered across the country now, living diminished lives far from the dreams they had once held. Most of them had refused to talk, too traumatized or too afraid to revisit what had happened. But a few had opened up, and their stories were heartbreaking in their similarity to mine. They had all trusted Mrs. Whitmore. They had all believed she cared about them, and they had all been methodically destroyed when they no longer served her purposes. "The problem is proving it," Ethan said during one of our meetings. "She's incredibly careful. She never leaves a paper trail. She never says anything incriminating where someone might overhear. Everything she does is deniable, plausible, explainable as concern or coincidence or misunderstanding. We need something concrete, something undeniable." I thought about this for days. What kind of evidence would be enough? A recorded confession? That seemed impossible. Mrs. Whitmore would never be stupid enough to admit what she had done. Documents? But what documents would even exist? She was not sending emails detailing her plans to destroy students. Witnesses? The only witnesses were her victims, and their testimony would be dismissed as bitter and biased. And then I remembered something that had been nagging at the back of my mind ever since Maya had told me that Mrs. Whitmore had been helping her with her story too. "The stories," I said to Ethan during our next meeting. "My story and Maya's story." The competition organizers said there were similarities. That's the whole basis of the plagiarism accusation. But what if those similarities aren't a coincidence? What if Mrs. Whitmore deliberately made our stories alike? Ethan's eyes lit up. "You think she gave you both the same suggestions? Pushed you in the same directions?" "I think it's possible. She had access to everything I wrote. She read every draft. She made suggestions about plot, characters, themes. If she was doing the same thing with Maya, she could easily have created overlaps, made us seem like plagiarists when really we were just both following her guidance." "But how do we prove that?" I thought about it. I have all my drafts saved on my computer. Every version of my story, going back to the very first one. And I have all of Mrs. Whitmore's feedback too. She would send me comments by email, detailed notes about what to change. If we can get Maya's drafts and Mrs. Whitmore's feedback to her, we might be able to show a pattern. Show that the similarities came from Mrs. Whitmore not from either of us copying the other. Ethan nodded slowly. That could work, but getting Maya's drafts is going to be tricky. She's not exactly going to hand them over. No, I agreed, but maybe she doesn't have to. It took 3 weeks to execute my plan, and every day of those 3 weeks was agony. I had to continue pretending to be broken and defeated while secretly working to gather the evidence I needed. I had to watch Mrs. Whitmore hold court in her classroom, smiling and charming and beloved by everyone who did not know what she really was. I had to watch Maya flaunt her victory, reveling in the attention and sympathy she received as the victim of my alleged plagiarism. I had to endure the whispers and the stares and the isolation, knowing that if my plan worked, it would all be worth it in the end. The key to everything was a girl named Lily Zhao. Lily was one of Maya's closest friends, part of the inner circle that followed her everywhere. She was sweet and slightly naive, the kind of person who attached herself to stronger personalities and went along with whatever they wanted. She had never been particularly mean to me, even after the plagiarism accusation. She just seemed uncomfortable whenever I was around, like she wanted to be somewhere else. I approached Lily one afternoon in the library, when she was alone for once, hunched over a chemistry textbook. She looked up when I sat down across from her, her eyes widening with surprise and discomfort. "Sophie," she said. Hi. Hi, Lily." I kept my voice calm and friendly. "Can I talk to you for a minute?" "I'm kind of busy. It's about Maya," I said, and I saw something flicker in Lily's eyes, something that looked almost like fear. "And about Mrs. Whitmore." Lily's face went pale. "I don't know what you're talking about." "I think you do," I said gently. "I think you've noticed things that don't quite add up, things that make you uncomfortable when you think about them too hard." I paused, letting my words sink in. "I'm not going to ask you to betray your friend, Lily, but I need to know the truth, and I think deep down you want to tell someone." There was a long silence. Lily stared at me, her hands trembling slightly on her textbook. I could see the conflict in her eyes, the desire to stay loyal to Maya warring with something else, guilt, maybe, or conscience. "Maya didn't write that story," Lily finally said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I mean, she wrote some of it, but a lot of it came from Mrs. Whitmore. Like, the whole plot, really. Maya was complaining about it over the summer. She wanted to write something different, something about her own life, but Mrs. Whitmore kept pushing her in a different direction, saying that the story would be stronger if it had these specific elements. Maya went along with it because Mrs. Whitmore was her teacher and she wanted to impress her, but she was frustrated. She felt like the story wasn't really hers. My heart was pounding. "Do you know what specific suggestions Mrs. Whitmore made?" Lily nodded slowly. "Some of them, yeah. Maya showed me her feedback emails. Mrs. Whitmore was really specific about the plot. The main character was supposed to be a girl dealing with her mother's memory loss. The story was supposed to be about watching someone you love slip away." Maya thought it was a weird choice because nothing like that had ever happened in her life, but Mrs. Whitmore insisted it would make a great story. I felt like I had been punched in the gut. The girl dealing with her mother's memory loss. That was my story. That was my life. Mrs. Whitmore had taken the most personal, painful thing I had ever written about and given it to Maya. "Why?" I whispered. "Why would she do that?" Lily shook her head. "I don't know. I really don't. But Sophie, there's something else." She hesitated, looking around to make sure no one was listening. "Maya didn't create those social media accounts, the ones that supposedly came from you. She doesn't know who did, but she was really freaked out when they appeared. She told me she had no idea where they came from. Mrs. Whitmore was the one who brought them up, who showed them to Maya's mother. I always thought that was weird. How did Mrs. Whitmore even find them? Because Mrs. Whitmore created them, I thought. Because she wanted to destroy me completely, and she knew that the plagiarism accusation alone might not be enough." I thanked Lily profusely. I told her that what she had shared might help clear my name, and that I would do everything in my power to keep her out of it. She looked relieved and terrified at the same time. Before I left, she grabbed my arm. "Be careful, Sophie," she said. "Mrs. Whitmore, She's not who everyone thinks she is. I've seen the way she looks at people sometimes, the way she looks at Maya even. It's like she's calculating something, planning something. I don't know what she really wants, but I don't think it's good for anyone. I thought about those words for a long time afterward. Ethan worked his technical magic to help me build my case. He was able to trace the fake social media accounts back to their creation, and while he could not definitively prove who had made them, he found some compelling evidence. The accounts had been created using a VPN that masked the creator's IP address, but they had been accessed several times from the school's Wi-Fi network. Ethan had managed to correlate those access times with the school's security footage, and while the cameras did not show exactly who was logging in, they did show that Mrs. Whitmore had been in the building and near the computer lab during several of those times. It was not proof, not yet, but it was a start. Meanwhile, I carefully compiled all of my own evidence, every draft of my story, with timestamps showing when each version was created, every email from Mrs. Whitmore with her feedback and suggestions, my notes from our meetings, including dates and times and summaries of what we had discussed. I built a timeline that showed the evolution of my story from its earliest conception to its final form. And then, with Lily's help, I managed to get something I never thought I would be able to obtain, a copy of Maya's story, along with her own drafts and Mrs. Whitmore's feedback emails. Lily snuck into Maya's laptop one night when Maya was asleep and copied everything to a flash drive. It was risky, and I felt guilty for asking her to do it, but it was necessary. Without Maya's side of the story, I could not prove what Mrs. Whitmore had done. When I finally had everything, I sat down with Ethan and we went through it together. The evidence was damning, absolutely damning. Mrs. Whitmore's feedback to me and her feedback to Maya was shockingly similar. Often using the exact same language, the exact same suggestions, she had pushed both of us toward the same themes, the same plot points, the same emotional beats. She had deliberately created overlap between our stories, knowing that when the competition organizers compared them, one of us would be accused of plagiarism. But there was more. As we dug deeper into the timing of everything, we discovered something even more disturbing. Maya had submitted her story to the competition 2 days before the deadline, the same day I had submitted mine. But Mrs. Whitmore's final feedback to Maya, the email telling her that her story was perfect and ready to submit, had been sent just hours before the deadline. And that feedback included suggestions that closely mirrored things I had already written in my story weeks earlier. She copied your ideas and gave them to Maya, Ethan said, staring at the screen in disbelief. She literally took your work and told Maya to incorporate it into her own story. And then she timed Maya's submission so it would be compared to yours. But why? I asked for the 100th time. Why would she want Maya to win instead of me? Ethan was quiet for a moment. Let me look into something, he said. It took him 2 days to find the connection, and when he did, everything finally made sense. Maya Chen's mother, Patricia Chen, was on the school's board of trustees. That much I already knew. What I did not know was that Patricia Chen was also the founder and chairwoman of the Whitmore Arts Foundation, a nonprofit organization that provided grants and scholarships to aspiring artists and writers. The foundation had been established 3 years ago, named in honor of Patricia's close friend and mentor, Claire Whitmore. Mrs. Whitmore had an ongoing financial relationship with Maya's family. The foundation paid her a salary as its executive director. It funded her attendance at conferences and writing retreats. It had even provided money to renovate her classroom at Westbrook Academy. In exchange, Mrs. Whitmore provided guidance and mentorship to students the foundation supported, students like Maya. She needed Maya to succeed, Ethan said. If Maya won prestigious competitions, it would reflect well on the foundation. It would attract more donors, more attention, more money. Mrs. Whitmore's position depended on Maya's success. And I was a threat to that. I realized, if I won the competition instead of Maya, it would make Mrs. Whitmore look bad. It would make the foundation look bad. It would threaten everything she had built. So she decided to get rid of you, frame you for plagiarism, destroy your reputation, eliminate the competition, all in one move. I felt sick. All those years of mentorship, all those hours of support and encouragement, and I had been nothing but a tool to her. A student to mold and shape and eventually sacrifice when I became inconvenient. "What do we do now?" I asked. Ethan looked at me with a grim expression. "We take her down." We spent the next month building our case, meticulously, carefully, leaving nothing to chance. Ethan prepared a detailed digital presentation showing the overlaps between Mrs. Whitmore's feedback to me and her feedback to Maya. We created side-by-side comparisons of our stories, highlighting the specific elements that Mrs. Whitmore had suggested to both of us. We documented the financial relationship between Mrs. Whitmore and the Chen family. We included the evidence about the fake social media accounts, the access logs, the security footage, but we knew that even with all of this evidence, going to the school administration might not be enough. Mrs. Whitmore was beloved by faculty and parents alike. Patricia Chen was a powerful member of the Board of Trustees. If we made our accusations and they were dismissed or covered up, we would be in an even worse position than before, so we decided to go bigger. My mother had spent her career in corporate law, but she had connections throughout the legal community. Through her network, she was able to put me in touch with a reporter at the Boston Globe who specialized in education stories. His name was Daniel Kowalski, and he had won several awards for his investigations into misconduct at private schools. When I told him what I had discovered about Mrs. Whitmore, he was immediately interested. "This is exactly the kind of story I've been looking for," Daniel said during our first phone call. "The abuse of power, the manipulation, the financial connections, it's all there. But I need to verify everything independently before I can publish anything. Can you send me all your evidence?" I did, and then I waited. The weeks that followed were some of the hardest of my life. Daniel was thorough and careful, reaching out to former students, interviewing faculty members, requesting documents through official channels. He could not tell me what he was finding or when the story might be ready. I just had to trust that he was doing his job. Meanwhile, life at school continued. My social isolation was complete by this point. I had no friends, no allies, no one willing to be seen talking to me. Mrs. Whitmore continued to teach her classes, continued to smile and charm and mentor new students, continued to look right through me like I did not exist. Maya continued to bask in the attention of her peers, the sympathy of her teachers, the approval of her mother's foundation. The injustice of it all burned inside me every single day, but I kept my head down. I kept my silence. I waited. And then, one morning in early March, my mother woke me up with her phone in her hand and tears streaming down her face. "Sophie," she whispered, "you need to see this." The Boston Globe had published Daniel's article. It was on the front page of the Metro section with the headline, "Beloved Teacher's Dark Pattern of Student Manipulation Exposed." The article was thousands of words long, meticulously researched and carefully written. It told the story of Claire Whitmore's decades-long career at Westbrook Academy, focusing on the students she had mentored and ultimately destroyed. It featured interviews with Rebecca Torres and 4 other former students, all of whom had experienced eerily similar patterns of support followed by sabotage. It detailed the financial relationship between Mrs. Whitmore and the Chen Family Foundation. It included expert analysis of the overlapping story elements and feedback, with a forensic linguist concluding that the similarities were almost certainly the result of deliberate guidance rather than coincidental plagiarism. And it quoted extensively from the evidence I had provided, though my name was never mentioned. Daniel had protected my identity, presenting the case from the perspective of anonymous sources and documents. The reaction was immediate and overwhelming. Within hours, the article had been picked up by national news outlets. Within days, the school was flooded with media requests and parental concerns. The Board of Trustees called an emergency meeting. Mrs. Whitmore was placed on administrative leave pending investigation. Patricia Chen resigned from the board, citing personal reasons. Maya Chen was withdrawn from school by her parents just 3 days after the article was published. I watched all of this unfold from the sidelines, feeling a strange mixture of vindication and emptiness. I had been right. I had been right all along, but knowing that, proving that, did not magically fix everything. It did not give me back the months of suffering. It did not erase the trauma of being accused and isolated and nearly destroyed. The school's investigation took 2 weeks. At the end of it, Mrs. Whitmore was terminated from her position and banned from campus. The plagiarism accusation against me was officially withdrawn, and my permanent record was cleared of all disciplinary notes. The principal issued a formal apology to me and my mother, acknowledging that the school had failed to adequately investigate the initial accusations and had caused me significant harm as a result. It was not enough. It was not nearly enough, but it was a start. Mrs. Whitmore faced other consequences as well. The State Teaching Certification Board opened an investigation into her conduct, and within 6 months, her license was revoked. The Whitmore Arts Foundation quietly dissolved, its assets distributed to other charitable organizations. Several of her former victims filed civil lawsuits against her and the school, and while I was not among them, I just wanted to move on. I heard that at least 2 of those cases resulted in significant settlements. I never saw Mrs. Whitmore again after the day she was placed on leave. I heard through the grapevine that she moved out of state, somewhere in the Midwest where no one knew her history. I wondered sometimes if she started over, if she found new students to mentor and eventually destroy. I hoped that the publicity had made that impossible, but I knew that predators like her were adept at reinvention. Senior year ended, and I graduated near the top of my class. My college applications, updated with letters of support from Daniel Kowalski and the school's new principal, were successful beyond my wildest dreams. I was accepted to Yale, Columbia, and Brown, all 3 of my dream schools. I chose Columbia in the end, partly because of its writing program, and partly because I wanted to be in New York, as far from Westbrook as possible, while still being close enough that my mother could visit. On the day I left for college, I sat in my bedroom for one last time and looked around at all the memories those walls contained. The books Mrs. Whitmore had lent me, which I had long since returned or donated. The awards I had won under her guidance, which I had tucked away in a closet rather than displayed. The manuscript of my short story, the one that had nearly destroyed me, which I had printed out and kept as a reminder of everything I had survived. I thought about everything that had happened over the past year, the betrayal, the isolation, the slow and methodical work of building my case, the moment of vindication when the article was published, the quiet satisfaction of watching Mrs. Whitmore's carefully constructed life fall apart.